Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable, Behavior Explained. Hi there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to be talking about a pretty painful topic if this applies to you. And we did another show on sexual abuse and the gap of knowledge. It's not a two-part series, but it might be one that you want to look at prior to watching this one, although they can be standalone episodes. But this episode is going to focus mostly on the impact of sexual abuse on survivors. And we're going to talk about some of the things that you might see and the long-term effects and the ways that we can address those. I'm especially thankful to have my guest today, Ellie Harris, who is a licensed associate counselor here at Infinite Healing and Wellness and a friend and colleague. And so thank you so much for being here today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ellie Harris, and I am really passionate about this topic. I think I've worked with a lot of clients that have been personally impacted by this topic and have loved seeing the hard work that they've put in to repair this trauma that they've experienced. So I love this topic. I love sharing more about this topic, and hopefully it encourages other people to seek healing.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being here. It's not a fun topic. There might be triggers that come up for you, so please make sure you take care of yourself if that happens. But it is really important that the impact of what happens to people isn't minimized and that it's normalized and validated. And so if you or someone that is struggling with some of the things that we talk about today, please know that they're not alone and that you're not alone, and that there is definitely help. And we'll have some options in the description below. So please check that out. So why don't you kick us off and let's talk about the emotional and psychological effects that happen to many survivors of sexual abuse.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of different impacts that sexual abuse can have on someone's emotional and psychological well-being. But one client that I've had, they were abused from about 6 to 12 years old by their uncle. And after a few years, they had tried, sharing with their parent that they were having this experience. And the parent was so shut down and didn't really know what to do. But thankfully, they did report it. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough physical evidence for the court to do anything. And so
so tragic.
So this client had this experience, and thankfully, well, not thankfully, but a few years later, there were other people coming forward that they were experiencing something similar from this uncle.
So hopefully justice eventually was served in this person's behalf.
Yes. But from, trying to advocate for themselves and speak up and then having this experience where they weren't protected by the court system, they really learned to shut down, and they don't have a lot of trust in other people and being protected by our justice system. And so a lot of lack of trust there. They have frequent nightmares, whether it's about those experiences or just a lack of safety.
Right.
They
powerlessness in general.
Absolutely.
Dreams that are thematically similar are often what I see in sexual abuse survivors, where it's not necessarily flashbacks of the scenes themselves, but representative images that oftentimes are part of their dream repertoire, but thematically symbolic of the powerlessness or the safety violations or the inability to speak up or be heard. Yeah. And those show up over and over in their dream experiences.
Yeah. And then they have all of that anxiety with them throughout the day, throughout their week, that their window of tolerance is just so narrow. So something that may not seem very stressful to the standard person may send them completely out of their window and make them feel really overwhelmed.
And just for our audience who may not know what that term means, we all have kind of an optimal window of arousal. And when we've had something bad happen to us, we can either end up in this hyper aroused space or in the hypo aroused space that can look like anxiety, fight, vigilance, or shut down, depressed, can't say no, passive. And so when you look at that window of tolerance, This is I can think and feel and react reasonably and use my prefrontal cortex to make decisions. And so if I've had something bad happen to me, I might find myself out of that window and responding in one of those other ways, or reacting rather, that don't really serve me for the given circumstance. So for those people who don't really know what that means, and I think sexual abuse always compromises that window.
Absolutely. And they can go to the more hyper aroused where they feel more anxious, more stressed, or they could go to the hypo aroused where they feel just numb and shut off from their experience.
And that shows up in future relationships. And oftentimes as children, that's not addressed because it's not something that's front of mind. But when they move into intimate relationships as they age, it shows up. With touch, with intimacy, with safety, with perception of safety. Yeah. Because if something looks, tastes, smells, and feels like, therefore must be the same. And so my experience of safety with my partner always feels compromised, even though my head knows they're safe and they haven't earned my distrust. Mm-hmm. My body reacts as if something dangerous could happen. And so there's that constant internal conflict. And I think that I've seen that over and over and over the years of working with people, where their spouse kicks up their unresolved trauma related to intimacy.
Absolutely.
Or their partner.
And, sometimes there really is a lack of safety that they may have in their relationship. And I've also seen a lot of times where maybe their partner is trying as best as they can to provide a safe space for sexual intimacy, but there's that still past present confusion where they feel like they're not safe. They feel like they're going to be taken advantage of.
Right. And that co-creates a problem with the partner too, because they haven't earned this reaction.
Absolutely.
They are showing up honoring and loving and safe and patient, but their partner can't treat them as if that's what's happening. And so then that creates problems in intimacy and connection and safety. And so I think that one of the things that's really important is, if this is part of your story, it's really important that you do your work on it, because if you don't, we end up, bleeding on people who didn't cut us, for a metaphor that oftentimes I think is fair, is, it's not that past present emotional confusion will in fact show up in our relationships. And it's not really our fault or their fault, but unfortunately we do have to address it and do some trauma therapy to help get resolution in our bodies, so that we can show up in the present with a level of safety and an absence of hypervigilance.
Yeah. Well, and I've even seen the opposite in some cases where, the person who is sexually abused becomes more hyper-sexualized, and they maybe have a higher...
promiscuity, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And, if they have a partner that maybe has a lower sex drive than they do, then that can cause a lot of hurt and tension.
Yeah. And I think another thing that people really minimize and undervalue, and even doctors don't necessarily bring this up, but there are oftentimes physical issues and physical ailments that are associated with the memory of traumatic experiences. So I'll give you a couple of examples, because I have seen this more often than not. So in a more mild area, let's say, my partner's aggressive or controlling or sometimes even mean. And you think about the resentment that builds if we can't speak up or get them to stop or get them to see what they're doing. And then you end up with, interestingly, and I've seen this in case after case, where I've seen, chronic UTIs or chronic yeast infections or things like that. And if you think about the body, there's if I can't speak up and get you to treat me better, my body's like, you're going to stay away. And it will create a reason that you don't have to say no. No, I don't want you that close to me. I don't feel safe, loved, honored by you. And so I don't feel like being intimate. But if I have internal confusion about, but I'm supposed to have sex with my husband and we've had really good days, but I'm still not over the thing that happened however many days ago, then my body will create a reason for me to not have to be close. And time after time with EMDR reprocessing, I have seen cases where they see the resentment, they see the history of the fighting or the history of the pain in their experience. And when we clear those emotional, unresolved memories and you clear that, they stop getting the yeast infections. They stop getting the UTIs. And so in cases like sexual abuse, we've seen things like labia cancer, ovarian cancer, chronic, like I said before, yeast infections, UTIs, where there's a physical danger response, like the immune system says, stay away, it's bad, I don't want anything to do with it. Sometimes breast cancer, all of these ailments can be, not always, but can be attributed to a sexual abuse experience, and the body is just acting out against, in protection of, or on behalf of the person. It's so fascinating. Have you seen other examples where the physicality shows up as a response and a correlation to history of abuse?
Yeah, absolutely. I think our bodies have learned, thankfully, such a intense way to protect ourselves, but it can be really, really hard. And I actually have a family member who was sexually abused by their father for years during their childhood, and later on ended up having uterine cancer.
Wow.
And although I don't know what the body was trying to do in response to that, but I know that their reproductive system was severely traumatized and was for a while.
Right. It just makes sense. Same goes with like inability to get pregnant. Oftentimes I'll see a correlation where the past is somewhat haunting. And so when we clear that memory, it's like the cellular restoration of the physicality becomes calm and doesn't have to be fighting. And so it can settle down. And I've had a few clients end up getting pregnant after we do work that, had to do with the injustices of things that had happened to them from the female intimacy perspective. And then their body was ready to receive and get pregnant. So, obviously there's not a direct correlation, but there's so much evidence and research and a great book to read, The Body Keeps the Score, that Besser van der Kolk did, that really helps to highlight and illustrate that, as well as a million other podcasts by Gabor Mate and other, renowned people in our profession that have done great work to share this kind of information. So I think that piece is oftentimes the body will speak up if we don't. It really will. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about the impact of this experience on relationships, but we're going to dig in a little bit more deeply. So tell us from your experience and perspective how you've seen this impact a relationship in the now.
Like, it is a common occurrence where someone who experienced sexual abuse when they were a child has trouble trusting their partner in a marriage or in a serious dating relationship. Right. And I've seen this in a lot of my clients where, their partner may or may not be providing that safe environment, but either way, they have these foggy goggles on that they can't trust either way. But I've not only seen the impact on their romantic relationships, but also with children or other people that were in a caregiving position for them. So for those clients that they did speak up and they told their parents, but their parents didn't believe them, or their parents didn't know what to do because they didn't know any better, they have a lot of hurt and resentment towards that parent and may avoid a deep, intimate relationship with that parent, and sometimes might have to end up caregiving for their parent in their older age, and they just have so much resentment built up.
It's so complex.
Absolutely.
It really is. I've even seen it manifest in parenting where, a parent is reluctant or reticent to even change diapers or to bathe their babies or their children because they were inappropriately touched in their childhood, and they just don't want to do the wrong thing. And so they have this innate inability to trust themselves of like what's okay and not okay touch. And so we've had to work through those things and, really normalize. You have to wipe very good for a baby, and you have to get in there and clean it really well because they can't, and you're not doing anything wrong. In fact, it's more neglectful to leave it. And those kinds of things can be so confusing for someone who who were mistreated. And I think those are the kinds of things that are often not discussed about relationship or and how, or even an overprotection. You can never go anywhere with anyone if I'm not there because the bad thing happened to me. And I'm going to now project onto you every experience with everyone that I don't know. And although the experiences of having been mistreated are common and frequent or prevalent, the likelihood that it's happening with everybody in every circumstance is just not so. And so educating oneself and really doing due diligence when it comes to spending time with people and talking to the providers that your children are going to be with, the parents and the caregivers and things like that. And really just having good, clear boundaries and communication, I think, is important, but not so much projection of what the fear is now putting on to other people, especially as it relates to parenting. Yeah. It's so important.
And working through, those foggy goggles that may come from their own trauma so that they can accurately perceive if a caregiver or babysitter or, family member that's caring for their child really is a threat or not.
Right. Yeah. We talk about, just for those who aren't familiar with that, the foggy goggles metaphor, when we have trauma and we've had things happen, it sort of clouds our perspective or our visibility because we're looking just through that lens. And so we can't see as clearly because we're tainted by the history of our experience. And so we've got to help clean lenses as a therapist so that you have clearer perspective and can delineate past present confusion and understand, although this happened to me, it doesn't mean it's happening now to everybody around me. And that we're not projecting. I think another thing we have to talk about is the impact, potential impact on economic situations and the ability to provide for oneself when I've been so pervasively traumatized. And if you think about our ability to learn, if we are in unsafe, in a lack of safety in our homes, I'm not going to school and really caring about math and English and getting my homework in. My mere survival has been about trying to be safe, trying to avoid being in danger in the future. And so I'm not learning. And so when you see the collateral damage that happens to someone who's going through for physical or sexual abuse as a child, we would be remiss not to mention the fact that likely it's affecting the ability to learn and education. And those educational outcomes being different affect our ability to provide for ourselves, to hold jobs, to make a decent enough living, to get through school, because our anxiety and our depression and our trauma symptoms very much can affect our ability to learn. And so I think that's an important piece of this puzzle that oftentimes is minimized for those who have had these kinds of experiences. What are things that we could do to address that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times what I see in clients is so much of it is a capacity issue. The trauma they've experienced takes up so much of their capacity. And so they just don't always have a whole lot for all of these relationships and work and these different stressors in their lives. So I think it's really important to look at, where can I take care of myself? Where can I, find avenues for healing and getting more capacity?
Right. And I mean, I think that's the piece that we really need to make sure people understand is if there is healing, and although it is not fair that one has to take on that responsibility, whether they're a child or they are an adult, there is a way to heal from this. It's not an easy path. It's not a linear path, but it definitely is a possible path. And so when we think about that, to help alleviate the shame that is so often part of the sexual abuse experience. The I'm bad, it's my fault, I should have done something else, I shouldn't have done something else. All of those things that are associated oftentimes with shame, and shame about my worth and my body in general. Like, there's usually so much complexity related to those things. And so healing really is possible. But like I said, it's a hard path. And so we want people to do bottom-up therapies. You want to talk a little bit about how, the therapies that we do with EMDR, how that can help?
Absolutely. I think a lot of times with trauma in general, but especially sexual abuse, is your body still living in those past experiences, often not when we are triggered, when we go throughout our daily lives. And so working through your sexual abuse with a bottom-up therapy and EMDR therapy can help your body realize that you're no longer in those past experiences that, yes, you went through that, but now in these current circumstances, you are safe. You have options. You aren't defective. And I've had so many clients that they feel that shame that you talked about, and they realize that it's not a part of their identity anymore, that they can be, their own person
and
with
free
their own
from this
value.
thing that happened to them. It doesn't have to be who I am. It can be just something that happened to me, and it can be over. It can get filed as if it's no longer happening.
Yeah. Or a lot of clients hold on to or believe that they're at fault for what happened.
Right.
They blame themselves. That
self-blame is so common.
Yes. Especially if, again, they think that they could have changed something or worn something different. Or, I have some clients that they didn't say anything, or they tried to and it didn't work. So other children or people were abused by that perpetrator, and they feel so much blame that they didn't stop it.
Right. Or even seeing someone else be abused and not speaking up. I've had that happen too, where, I was in the room and my little sister was being abused and I didn't say anything. I just laid there frozen. What kind of person does that? There's a lot of vicarious trauma from witnessing or experiencing something like that. And so oftentimes that's part of the work that we have to do to help someone heal.
Yeah, understanding why we freeze or why we shut down or why we submit, and then helping our body find a different way.
Right. For those who are interested in learning more about EMDR therapy, I've got 2 episodes earlier in this season about what is EMDR therapy, and a couple of other episodes on how we work and the way the body responds to trauma. So those might be good ones to watch to have a greater explanation about all of the concepts that we're discussing today. But Ellie, I really appreciate you being here for this incredibly important but very hard conversation. And for those of you who this has been an affliction of yours and you've dealt with this, please know that there is help. And please go get some help, and don't be alone with this, because there is healing, and you just don't have to live with this for the rest of your life. And although the path is not easy, like I said, there is a path to healing. And so hopefully you've learned something that can help you, and I wish you the best in that healing journey. There are some resources in the descriptions below if you are looking for some additional help. So thank you so much for being here today. And until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.